I've attended my fair share of disaster waiting to happen diplomatic gatherings, but this one on Nexus 9 promised to set a new benchmark for potential catastrophe. The grand diplomatic hall aboard the station was a testament to overpriced architecture and desperate neutrality. All smooth curves, inoffensive colors, art and accommodations for every known sentient body type in the galaxy. As Ambassador Drell Vorx of the Zolaxian Confederacy, I had the dubious honor of mediating this circus. Being blessed with 4 arms means everyone assumes you can juggle twice as many problems. Spoiler alert, we can't. Ambassador Vorx, the Krall delegation is demanding a different seating arrangement. Again, my aide, Plex, buzzed anxiously beside me, all 6 of his eyes blinking out of sync. Poor guy's stress response always gave me a headache. Tell them they'll sit where assigned, or they can float outside and negotiate with the vacuum, I growled, straightening my ceremonial collar. This is the 4th change they've requested in 2 hours. Around the massive circular table, representatives from 17 space-faring civilizations were taking their positions. The tension was thick enough to spread on toast. The Glen and the Mosari delegates were pointedly ignoring each other after their recent border skirmish. The Tellurian ambassador kept her breathing apparatus turned up to maximum, creating an annoying whistling sound that I'm convinced was deliberate. But the main event was the Krall Empire facing off against the Federated Worlds. 3 solar systems in dispute, 2 species with trigger tentacles, and 1 exhausted Zolaxian caught in the middle. Just another Wednesday in galactic politics. Is that the human representative? I asked Plex, nodding toward the entrance where a small figure had appeared. Of all the delegates, the human was the least physically impressive. Standing at what I estimated to be 180 centimeters, he possessed no claws, spines, tentacles, or even proper body armor. Just smooth, vulnerable skin and a peculiar arrangement of facial hair. He wore a simple blue suit that concealed most of his form. Yes, Marcus Reed of Earth, Plex confirmed, displaying the data on his tablet. First time representing humanity at a class of negotiation. I snorted through my upper nostrils. Why send such a low-ranking official? The Federated Worlds must not value this treaty if they're sending their pet primitive. The file indicates he's actually their specialist. Plex's antenna twitched nervously. Specialist? At what? Being fragile? I quipped, watching the human calmly take his seat between the hulking Draxian ambassador and the acid-secreting Voss representative. He'll be eaten alive in this crowd, possibly literally, if he offends the Krall. The human called Marcus Reed caught my gaze from across the room and had the audacity to smile and offer a small nod. I turned away dismissively. Just another irrelevant player in this grand game of interstellar politics. How spectacularly wrong I was about to be. 3 hours into negotiations, and I was already contemplating a career change. Perhaps something relaxing, like diffusing antimatter bombs or wrestling with Centaurian sand vipers. The Krall Empire categorically rejects the proposed boundaries of the Trixian sector, Ambassador Gorax thundered. His massive fist slamming onto the table hard enough to make the refreshment glasses jump. Standing at nearly 3 meters tall with armored skin that could deflect small arms fire, Gorax was the perfect representation of Krall diplomacy, loud, intimidating, and about as subtle as a supernova. The Federated Worlds delegation responded with predictable outrage. Arguments erupted across the table, translators working overtime as 17 different species tried to shout over each other in 34 languages. Order. We will maintain diplomatic protocols, I shouted, using all 4 arms to gesture for silence. Gradually, the chaos subsided, though Gorax remained standing, his ridge spines fully extended in a classic Krall threat display. That's when I noticed something odd. The human Reed hadn't said a word since the proceedings began. He simply sat there, occasionally making notes on a primitive paper notebook, actual processed tree pulp, if you can believe the extravagance. When he shifted in his seat, I observed the strangest thing. The massive Draxian ambassador beside him actually moved to give him more space. The Draxian, a species famous for never yielding ground on principle, had just deferred to a being half its size. Ambassador Vorx, came a calm voice that somehow cut through the residual noise. It was Reed, addressing me directly for the first time. Perhaps a short recess would allow tempers to cool. Before I could respond, Vorx swiveled his massive head toward the human. The Krall do not need to cool tempers, soft creature. Your Federated Worlds sent a weakling to represent them. Is this how little they value these negotiations? I expected Reed to shrink under the Krall's intimidating gaze. Instead, he smiled pleasantly. Ambassador Vorx, I assure you my presence here reflects exactly how seriously we take these talks. Something in his tone made several species around the table shift uncomfortably. The Voss representative actually retracted her stingers, a sign of respect I'd never seen them show to anyone. We will take a 1-hour recess, I announced, curious about this development. During the break, I couldn't help but notice how other delegates interacted with Reed. They maintained a peculiar buffer zone around him, like planets orbiting a star at a safe distance. Even more telling was that when the Medusan ambassador accidentally bumped into Reed, she immediately apologized with all 3 of her speech orifices. Medusans don't apologize to anyone. And ever. Plex, I whispered to my aide as we retreated to our private chamber. Pull everything we have on this human. Something isn't adding up. While Plex worked, I observed Reed through the monitoring system. He moved through the reception area with an easy confidence, sipping on water while others consumed intoxicants. When Vorx deliberately blocked Reed's path, a blatant dominance display, the human simply stood his ground, looking up at the towering Krall with an expression that could almost be described as amused. Ambassador, I have the information, Plex said, his voice unusually tight. It's concerning. The file on Marcus Reed was heavily redacted, never a good sign. His official title was Special Diplomatic Envoy, but attached notes from various species told a different story. The Arcturian report described him as the solution sender. A Valerian security brief called him the quiet consequence. Most disturbing was a Krall military assessment labeling him simply as do not engage individually. This doesn't make sense, I muttered. He's just a human. They're practically infants on the galactic stage. There's more, Plex continued nervously. 3 standard years ago, Reed was present during the Proxima incident. I felt my breathing sacs constrict. Everyone knew about the Proxima incident. A routine negotiation that ended with 4 dead Thoraxian enforcers, a species with exoskeletons strong enough to withstand vacuum. The official report cited internal conflict, but rumors suggested otherwise. And this, Plex added, showing me security footage from a Federated Worlds embassy. It showed Reed calmly walking through what appeared to be the aftermath of an attack. Bodies of would-be assassins lay scattered around him. The human suit was immaculate, except for a small bloodstain on his right cuff that he was fastidiously dabbing with a handkerchief. A message notification flashed on our system. The recess was ending. Ambassador, Plex said quietly as we prepared to return, there's a saying I found in the human database, beware the fury of a patient man. Back in the Grand Diplomatic Hall, I found myself watching Reed with new eyes. He still looked harmless, but now I understood why the others kept their distance. When Vorx stormed back in, deliberately knocking over a smaller delegate from the Pishi Alliance, I noticed how Reed's eyes followed the Krall ambassador. His expression hadn't changed, but something in those eyes reminded me of the void between stars, empty, cold, and very, very dark. Let us resume negotiations, I said, with considerably less confidence than before. After 6 grueling hours of negotiations, we'd made exactly 0 progress. The evening reception was meant to ease tensions, but judging by the way species were clustering into opposing factions around the Grand Atrium, we'd need more than fancy whores, Dio-Woovers, and imported Venusian champagne to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe. I was nursing my third glass of fermented Zalaxian root juice when it happened. Vorx and 3 other Krall delegates cornered Reed near the crystalline water feature that dominated the center of the room. Even from across the atrium, I could see Vorx's posture, spine ridges fully extended, upper mandibles splayed in the traditional prelude to a challenge. The music faded as conversations halted mid-sentence. Within seconds, a bubble of silence spread across the reception. So the soft skin thinks he can dictate terms to the Krall Empire. Vorx's voice boomed, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. You humans are barely out of your gravity well. Your bones would snap between my fingers. I moved closer, ostensibly to intervene in my role as mediator, but honestly, I was curious. Reed stood there, drink in hand, looking almost comically small next to the Krall's massive frame. What surprised me was his expression, not fear, but something closer to boredom. Ambassador Vorx, Reed replied, his voice carrying easily despite its measured tone. I've always admired the Krall talent for stating the obvious. Yes, you could break my bones. You could also breathe oxygen and metabolize proteins. Shall we list more of our biological functions, or could we perhaps return to diplomacy? A ripple of nervous laughter circulated through the room. Vorx's secondary eyes bulged in rage. You mock me, human? The Krall took a step forward, looming over Reed. Perhaps your species needs a lesson in respect. The 3 Krall guards flanking Vorx shifted into attack positions. Every security officer in the room tensed, hands moving to weapons. We were seconds away from an interstellar incident. Not mocking, just making an observation, Reed responded, casually sipping his drink. Though I should point out that the last person who offered to teach me a lesson is now working as a greeter at a mining colony restaurant. The job accommodates his new mobility limitations quite well. The implication hung in the air. I watched as several delegates who had been edging closer suddenly found reasons to back away. The Tellurian ambassador actually dropped her drink. You threaten me? Vorx was practically vibrating with rage now. The Krall Empire has conquered worlds while your species was still throwing rocks at each other. Reed smiled, not the diplomatic smile from earlier, but something different, something predatory. Correction, Ambassador. We never stopped throwing rocks. He took another sip. We just got much better at it. That's when I noticed the change. It was subtle, so subtle I doubt anyone without 4 eyes dedicated to reading body language would have caught it. Reed's weight had shifted imperceptibly to the balls of his feet. His free hand, hanging casually at his side, had uncurled from a relaxed position to something more ready. Most telling of all, his eyes had become utterly focused, pupils dilating slightly. I'd seen that look before, on apex predators just before they strike. Vorx took another threatening step forward, crowding Reed against the water feature. Perhaps I should demonstrate Krall superiority here and now. Your Federation would have to send a replacement diplomat. So sad. The room was so quiet you could hear the environmental system cycling air. Security personnel looked to me, waiting for orders to intervene, but something held me back. Some instinct told me this was a moment of truth that would define the rest of the negotiations. Reed placed his drink carefully on a nearby table, the small clink of glass against surface almost shocking in the silence. Ambassador, he said, voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carried in the silent room, I feel there's been a misunderstanding about my role here. Enlighten me, soft skin, Vorx sneered. Reed straightened his cuffs, a small, deliberate motion that somehow seemed loaded with meaning. I'm not here because the Federation needs protecting from the Krall. His smile disappeared completely, replaced by an expression so cold it made my exoskeleton tighten reflexively. I'm here because the Krall need protecting from the Federation. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vorx's features. One of his guards shifted nervously. You see, Reed continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather, My government believes in sending warning shots before taking action. I'm that warning shot. And right now, Ambassador, I'm giving you an opportunity that doesn't come with an obituary attached. The silence that followed was absolute. I realized I was holding my breath in all 4 lung sacs. Then Reed smiled again, bright and sudden as a solar flare. Now, shall we discuss those boundary concessions over another drink? I find negotiating goes much smoother when everyone keeps all their original appendages. The tension held for 3 more seconds before Vorx, with an obvious effort, pulled back his spine ridges. Perhaps we can revisit certain terms, he growled. As the crowd cautiously resumed their conversations, I caught Reed's eye across the room. He raised his refreshed drink in a small toast to me, expression once again pleasantly bland. But now I knew better. The smallest being in the room was also the most dangerous, and somehow everyone else had known it all along. After the reception, I needed answers. Diplomatic protocols be damned. I found Security Chief Lana Brightstar in her office, reviewing footage of the evening's near disaster. Half Arcturian, half something undisclosed, Brightstar had skin that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She'd been running security on Nexus 9 for 15 years, which meant she knew everyone's secrets. I was wondering when you'd show up, Ambassador Vorx, she said without looking away from her screens. Take a seat. I assume you're here about our human guest. What exactly is Marcus Reed? I asked, settling my forearms into a neutral position. Because he's certainly not a normal diplomat. Brightstar laughed, a musical sound at odds with her reputation for ruthless efficiency. Fine normal. But no, he's not what you'd call standard diplomatic corps. She pulled up a file on her terminal, angling it so I could see. Earth has an interesting approach to interstellar relations. Most species send their smoothest talkers, their most educated legal minds. Humans sometimes send their most effective problem solvers. He's an assassin? I asked, feeling my scales tighten with alarm. Nothing so crude, Brightstar frowned. The humans have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. Most species just bring the stick. Humans like Reed are both the soft speech and the stick, wrapped in one unassuming package. She pulled up historical files, Earth's bloody progression from tribal conflicts to global wars. Humans evolved on a death world, Ambassador. Not in the way the Krall claim their homeworld is harsh. Earth is actively trying to kill its inhabitants at all times. Atmospheric electrical discharges, tectonic instabilities, microorganisms that can fell a healthy human in days. Predators of all kinds. I shifted uncomfortably. Many species evolved in challenging environments. Not like this, Brightstar shook her head. Most predator species evolved one perfect killing method. Venom, strength, speed. Humans, they're persistence predators. Not the strongest, not the fastest. But they never, ever stop. And they can turn anything into a weapon. She switched to footage I recognized, the infamous Proxima incident. Official records say 4 Thoraxian enforcers killed each other in a dispute. The truth. Reed was cornered after negotiations broke down. The Thoraxians thought their exoskeletons made them invulnerable. The footage showed Reed, surrounded, speaking calmly to the Thoraxians. Then a blur of motion. He killed 4 armored enforcers with what? I leaned closer, unable to process what I was seeing. A ceramic coffee cup and his bare hands, Brightstar said flatly. 17 seconds from start to finish. That's impossible, I whispered, though the evidence was right before my eyes. There was an incident on Centauri Prime last year, Brightstar continued. A group of Saurian extremists took a human embassy hostage. The Federation sent Reed to negotiate. When talks failed, the Saurians threatened to execute hostages. She pulled up another file. Reed walked into their stronghold alone. No weapons detected on entry scan, 12 minutes later, he walked out with all 23 hostages. The only Saurian survivor described him as death wearing a polite smile. I felt a chill run through all 4 of my hearts. Why would they send someone like that here? We're conducting peaceful negotiations. Brightstar's luminescent patterns shifted to a deeper blue. Because the Federation is tired of the Krall pushing boundaries. They're not sending Reed to assassinate anyone. They're sending him as a message. What message? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. That humans don't need size or natural weapons to be dangerous. That the quiet, polite species that keeps to itself has teeth. She closed the files with a gesture. The Krall don't respect diplomacy, Ambassador Vorx. They respect strength and the willingness to use it. I remembered Reed's posture when confronted by Vorx. The subtle shift from diplomat to something ancient and predatory. How quickly it had happened. How easily he had switched back. The truly frightening thing about humans like Reed, Brightstar said, studying my reaction, isn't their capacity for violence. It's their restraint. Any species can lash out. It takes a certain kind of evolutionary terror to smile at something threatening your life, calculate exactly how much force is needed to end that threat, and then choose not to. Until necessary. As I left Brightstar's office, my perception of the negotiations had fundamentally changed. The human wasn't some token representative. He was a calculation made flesh, a carefully calibrated warning. For the first time in my diplomatic career, I found myself hoping that cooler heads would prevail. Because I now understood what everyone else already seemed to know. The smallest being in the room was the one you absolutely did not touch. The final day of negotiations began with cautious optimism. After the confrontation at the reception, Vorx had been surprisingly accommodating. Too accommodating, as it turned out. I should have suspected something when the Krall delegation arrived with 4 additional cultural attaches, massive specimens even by Krall standards, their ceremonial armor barely concealing military-grade augmentations. We were midway through the final treaty draft when the chamber doors sealed with an ominous hiss. Vorx rose from his seat, mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his kind. "This charade has gone on long enough," he announced. "The Krall Empire does not compromise. We take what is ours." The 4 Krall guards moved with practiced efficiency, producing weapons that should have been caught by security scans. Within seconds, they had positioned themselves strategically around the chamber. One of them grabbed the Tellurian ambassador, pressing a vibro blade against her breathing apparatus. "My government anticipated your reluctance to honor our claims," Vorx continued, clearly enjoying himself. "So we've arranged more favorable terms." The main view screen activated, showing Krall infiltrators in the station's critical systems. "Not good. Station security has been neutralized," Vorx announced. "And in 30 minutes, this station will suffer a catastrophic life support failure. Unless, of course, all delegates sign our revised treaty, ceding all disputed territories to the glorious Krall Empire." Around the table, delegates reacted with shock and outrage. The Voss representative hissed threats. The Draxian ambassador bellowed challenges. The Mosari delegate appeared to be praying. Standard crisis responses. All except Reed. The human hadn't moved from his seat, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. He appeared to be examining the stylus in his hand with unusual interest. "Ambassador Reed," Vorx turned to him. "Perhaps you'd like to contact your Federation first? Tell them to prepare for significant territorial adjustments?" Reed looked up, as if just noticing the crisis. "That won't be necessary," he said, placing the stylus carefully on the table. "I have full authority to resolve this situation." "Excellent," Vorx smirked. "Then you'll be the first to sign." Reed stood, straightening his jacket. "Actually, I was thinking of a different resolution." He surveyed the room with calm, calculating eyes. To my astonishment, he raised both hands in apparent surrender and moved toward the nearest Krall guard. "Ambassador Reed, don't be foolish," I hissed, but the human ignored me. "I don't like enclosed spaces," Reed said conversationally as he approached the guard. "Four walls make me nervous. Do you know what makes me even more nervous?" The guard snarled, training his weapon on Reed's chest. Silence, soft skin. "Four Krall with delusions of adequacy," Reed finished with a sigh. "Look, I'm trying to give you an out here. Lower your weapons, release the hostages, and you can all leave with your exoskeletons intact." The chamber went deadly quiet. Was this human insane? He was surrounded by armed Krall, each twice his size and several times his strength. Vorx let out a booming laugh. "You threaten us? Perhaps I'll keep you alive long enough to watch your Federation representatives sign over their territories." Reed shook his head, looking genuinely disappointed. "That's a no, then." What happened next occurred so quickly that my multiple eyes barely processed it. Reed's hands, still raised in surrender, suddenly held the decorative light fixture he'd detached from the ceiling. With a flick that betrayed inhuman strength, he sent it spinning toward the main guard's face. As the Krall instinctively raised his weapon to block, Reed was already moving. He slid across the polished table, grabbing my ceremonial water vessel as he passed. The heavy metallic container became a projectile that caught the second guard in the throat with precision that couldn't be accidental. While that guard choked and staggered, Reed was on the third, the one holding the Tellurian hostage. There was a blur of motion, the sound of something hard striking exoskeleton, and suddenly the Tellurian was free and the guard was on the floor, vibroblade now embedded in his own leg joint. "You know what your problem is?" Reed asked, dodging a wild swing from the fourth guard with insulting ease. "Or training." He caught the guard's arm mid-strike, using the Krall's own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. Also, he added as the guard crumpled, terrible spatial awareness. 17 seconds. That's all it took. The first guard recovered enough to aim his weapon, but Reed was already there, twisting the gun away with one hand, while the other delivered a precise strike to what I knew to be a nerve cluster under Krall armor. The guard collapsed, limbs twitching uncontrollably. "For the record," Reed said, now holding the weapon casually, "that's called a brachial stun. Your species has 6 vulnerable nerve clusters that cause temporary paralysis when struck correctly. We mapped them all after our first contact." The second guard had recovered his breath and charged with a roar. Reed sidestepped with dancer-like grace, extending his foot. The charging Krall, unable to adjust, tripped spectacularly and crashed into the table, splintering it. "Momentum," Reed explained to the room at large, as if conducting a physics lesson. "It's a harsh teacher." He turned to face Vorx, who stood frozen in disbelief. The human hadn't even broken a sweat. "Now, about those infiltrators," Reed said pleasantly, checking his wrist device. "You should be receiving some interesting news any moment." On cue, the view screen flickered, showing the Krall infiltrators now in restraints, surrounded by station security. "Did you really think the Federation wouldn't have its own people on this station?" Reed asked, sounding almost sympathetic. "Chief Brightstar sends her regards, by the way. She's quite cross about the security breach." Vorx, realizing his plan had completely unraveled, roared and drew a concealed weapon. Before anyone could react, he fired at Reed. What should have been a killing shot instead met empty air. The human had moved aside with impossible speed. Now he stood beside Vorx, the stylus he'd been examining earlier pressed against the Krall's neck. "This is a standard Earth-writing implement," Reed said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "In my hand, it can pierce your carotid artery through your armor. You'd bleed out in approximately 40 seconds. For perhaps the first time in recorded history, a Krall ambassador trembled. "But then I'd have to fill out incident reports for weeks," Reed continued, withdrawing the stylus and pocketing it. And frankly, your replacement would probably be just as tedious to deal with. So instead, you're going to order your surviving guards to stand down, and we're going to return to the original treaty terms, with a few adjustments in the Federation's favor, to compensate for this unfortunate misunderstanding. Vorx, defeated, gave the stand-down order. As station security flooded in to take control, Reed returned to his seat, straightening his slightly rumpled jacket. "Sorry about the table, Ambassador Vorx," he said to me with that same bland smile. "Federation will cover the damages, of course." I stared at him, seeing for the first time what he truly was, not a diplomat who could fight, but a weapon who could negotiate. "Shall we resume?" Reed asked, retrieving his stylus and notebook from the wreckage with perfect composure. I believe we were discussing border concessions. The treaty signing ceremony proceeded with uncharacteristic efficiency 2 days later. Amazing how cooperative everyone becomes after watching 4 elite Krall warriors dismantled by a single human armed with office supplies. The Krall delegation, now led by a subdued assistant Ambassador Trax after Vorx's sudden reassignment, accepted terms that were remarkably reasonable considering their attempted coup. The disputed territories would remain neutral for 20 standard years, with joint development rights and shared resource allocation. Most notably, the treaty included a new clause: human Federation observers would serve as guarantors at all major outposts. No one objected. Funny how that works. As delegates filed out after the signing, I found myself standing alone on the observation deck, watching ships depart from the station. The stars beyond the viewport seemed colder somehow, the universe a more dangerous place than I'd understood before. "Credit for your thoughts, Ambassador Vorx." I didn't need to turn to recognize Reed's voice. He joined me at the viewport, gazing out at the same stars. "I was just contemplating a significant revision to the Zolaxian Threat Assessment database," I replied honestly, "particularly regarding deceptive appearances." Reed chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm and genuine, a wise adjustment. "Though I hope you'll note that humans prefer cooperation to conflict. We're really quite reasonable," says the man who took down 4 armed Krall with a stylus and a water jug. 5, actually, he corrected with a wink. "The one in the corridor tried to ambush me on the way in. That's why I was 2 minutes late to the session." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this friendly, almost jovial individual with the calculated violence I'd witnessed. "You're a paradox, Reed. Your species appears so fragile. No natural armor, no claws, middling strength at best. Yet we somehow stumbled our way to the galactic stage?" He smiled. "Evolution is funny that way. On Earth, we weren't the biggest or the strongest. We didn't have the best senses or natural weapons. What we had was adaptability, endurance, and these." He wiggled his fingers, those strangely dexterous appendages that had moved with such deadly precision. Plus pattern recognition and problem-solving that let us turn anything into an advantage, he continued. "When everything on your planet is trying to kill you, you either get very good at survival or you go extinct." I found myself laughing, despite everything. "And the Federation sent you, their most dangerous predator, as a diplomat. The irony is exquisite. Who better to value peace than someone who truly understands war?" Reed's expression turned briefly serious. "We don't want conflict, Ambassador. We just want everyone to know that if pushed, we push back. Hard." As we stood there, I realized something that perhaps I should have seen from the beginning. Humans weren't just dangerous because of their hidden physical capabilities. They were dangerous because they understood the power of perception, of being underestimated, of showing strength through restraint rather than display. "Well, Ambassador Reed, I believe your mission here has been thoroughly successful," I said, extending 2 of my 4 hands in the traditional Zolaxian gesture of respect. The Zolaxian Confederacy would welcome closer diplomatic ties with humanity. Reed shook both my hands firmly. I'd like that very much, Ambassador Vorx. Perhaps you could visit Earth someday. We have a drink I think you'd enjoy. It's called tequila. I've heard rumors about human intoxicants, I said with mock horror. They say 1 glass of your alcohol would dissolve a Voss's digestive tract. Only the cheap stuff, Reed laughed, then checked his communication device. Ah, my transport is ready. Federation wants a full report. As he turned to leave, I couldn't resist one last question. Reed, what would you have done if Gorax hadn't backed down? Would you really have killed him with a writing implement? Reed paused, and for a brief moment, that mask of affable diplomacy slipped. The predator beneath looked out at me with calm, calculating eyes. Ambassador Vorx, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach those eyes, I never make threats, only promises. Then he was gone, leaving me with the unsettling realization that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The universe now contained humans, smiling, polite, seemingly fragile creatures who could become living weapons between one heartbeat and the next. The smallest beings in the room, the ones you absolutely do not touch. Unless, of course, they offer you their hand first.